Oh, hello. There we are.
Hi.
Hi, nice to see you. You okay? I was panicking then. I wasn't sure how that was going to go. I clicked accept three times. So yeah, but we got there. Third time lucky on that. Good evening. How are you, Ruth? You okay?
Yeah, good. Thanks. We're just getting bedtime settled here, so I was just sort of like trying to find a spot where I could like keep my phone on charge while we're chatting.
Oh, brilliant. Well, if we get a little visitor, that's absolutely fine. It's always nice to see the little ones. So we've got about 51 people here with us at the moment, which is really, really exciting. So I thought before we get started, if we just do some introductions, just so everyone kind of knows who we are and why we're doing this session tonight. So I will start. My name is Becca and I'm a symbol education specialist at Widget. So my background lies within education, which is where I taught for 10 years mainstream and then 4 years in an autism specialist setting, which is where I discovered Widget and the power of symbols to be able to communicate. And I worked with an amazing speech and language therapy called Lizzie, who showed me the world of communication boards rather than using individual symbols. And I've been really passionate about it since. So it's a real pleasure to be able to speak with you tonight and share some of the knowledge that I've got, because I need to make it very clear I'm not a speech and language therapist. Any advice and things that I give on the videos with Widget are very much from my learned experience and lived experience with the people and the families that I've worked with. So over to you, Ruth.
Yeah, thanks. Well, hi, I'm Ruth. I'm a speech therapist. I have worked. Oh my gosh, I qualified a long time ago. You forget, don't you,
Yeah.
how much like time by? But I qualified in 2010. And I have worked predominantly in special education provision for autistic children. In the earlier part of my career, I was based in kind of residential schools, so really high support needs children. Symbols were everywhere and loved and equally hated by many when you're constantly having to replace them and lose
Yeah,
them and that
absolutely.
you put them through the washing machine. And then more recently, I've become an independent therapist. So I work with some schools, I work with children and their families kind of in home settings or in, some are in mainstreams or in early years provisions. So yeah, I get a real variety in terms of the places that I'm working now. But one thing is consistent and that is visuals. So that's great.
Real perfect. And the reason that we asked you on tonight is because we've seen some of your posts and things that you do. And what I really liked about the post that you share and your ethos is that it is very, very neuro affirming, and it's making sure, that people are communicating in a way that is suitable to them. And we're going to talk a little bit later, aren't we, about one of your most recent posts around communicating, because it was just absolutely brilliant and it had such real discussions. So before we get started, I'm going to kind of start with a few of the technical questions that we had that are very widget specific. So over the past week, we've had Communication Board Week and we've looked at how you can use communication boards. Hopefully across the week we addressed a lot of the questions. If you haven't seen the videos, please go back and have a look at them from over the weeks. They answer questions around the different colour schemes that we're using within our boards. So if people have got questions about that tonight, we can obviously, go back over it. But there's whole videos that look at colourful semantics and the adapted Fitzgerald scheme. Lots of people have commented on the resources that we've shared and they've said, can we buy these made up? Unfortunately, at Widget, we are a software company. So we've two types of software. We've got Widget Online and Imprint 3. So what our software allows you to do is to create those resources and design them so they meet the needs of the person that you are working with, and then you can then print them off and use them as you see fit with the people that you're with. But unfortunately, we don't sell the physical products because we've had lots of questions around that. So that's kind of the first main thing that I wanted to cover and to tick off. But we've had quite a few questions that came up repeatedly, Ruth. So we've spoken about those a little bit, haven't we? And these ones are really kind of over to you with your speech and language therapist head on, because have the ones that I feel that I can answer, but I think your input will be really invaluable in that. So one of the first ones that we had, and if anyone has got any questions as we go through, please pop them down below. It was, hi, I want to create my own communication boards for my son. What are standard core words that I should include as standard in every single one? Also, I want them to be able to cover all the core and fringe words as well. So I guess in that they're saying what core words should be on every single board. But before we move on, could you do a quick description of what core and fringe words are for people, Ruth?
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
So core words, there's kind of a research-based group of words that we know are super powerful for communication. So words are words that are going to scaffold sentences. They're the ones that offer lots of variety. And fringe words tend to be our nouns. They tend to be more like our stuff. So like if you were thinking about building a communication board, let's take food, because that's always one that people kind of go to. It's very meaningful for a lot of children, young people, and individuals. When you're thinking about your fringe vocabulary, that's going to be the types of food and drink that you're going to put on your boards. Okay. So anything, your crisps, your biscuits, your fruit, that sort of stuff, those kind of noun words that are just objects tend to be, they're kind of more the fringe vocabulary. So our core vocabulary are going to be typically verbs, and they basically help develop lots of different sentences. So if you think about a really basic communication tool, like a choosing board, what you might have is just I want and then a load of fringe vocabulary, and all that allows that individual to do is create an I want sentence. Mm-hmm. So what we want to do with core is really open up the opportunities for multiple types of communication that we can be working on with that one board. So if you've got your fringe vocabulary of the different foods and drinks that they might like, what you could then have is want, you might have help, you might have open, you might have like, you might have not. So not like that, or I like that. Help, open that. So you can start to see that really that core opens up the world of communication, where nouns typically, it's one thing, you say an apple, you mean an apple. Whereas add the core, then you can start to open up the things that you can develop and the words that you can teach. And typically, in my experience, what we know is for a lot of children and young people, they will know their nouns, so they know the stuff they want, they can point to the object, it's there, it's very tangible. Whereas the verbs and those kind of more core words, they're harder to represent because often they're a bit more abstract. Absolutely. But we need them in order to offer a variety of different communication things that we're going to be teaching.
Absolutely. And it makes that conversation, and it makes the communication much more functional, doesn't it? In everyday life, we aren't just making requests, we've got that functional communication and that conversational, and by adding in those core words, then you can really model that, can't you? Great, thanks for that, Ruth. That's a really good explanation. So that was the first one. Another one that's come up is, and this is one that lots of people ask about, and I didn't answer it because I wanted to save it for tonight. And I know that you said lots of people ask you about it as well. So what's the best for Gestalt language? So, first of all, again, it is a very hot topic at the moment. I know quite a lot of people aren't aware of what it is, so it is probably, again, just worth you giving a little bit of an explanation about what Gestalt language is, and then explaining how you may use that and model it within communication boards. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So Gestalt language processes, typically we kind of think about it, and it's often heard of and termed echolalia. And that's kind of when we find individuals who echo back language that they have heard from a previous situation. So you can have immediate echolalia, which is when children, young people, individuals will echo back something they've heard right in that moment. And for a lot of people, they might use that as a bit of a processing, a bit of an auditory cue. It might be a bit of a filler while they're thinking about what they're going to say. When we think about Gestalt language processors, these are kind of the individuals who use more of that delayed echolalic profile. So they're going to have heard things and then draw on it and use it at other times further on down the line. So it's not immediately in the conversation they're echoing back what you said. It's going to be things that they might have heard from movies, lyrics from songs. It might be things that they've heard their parents say. And when we think about Gestalt language processors, we think of them as intonation babies. So these are kiddos who are going to be tuning in to the musicality and the rhythm and the sounds that they're hearing with words, rather than applying the meaning to an individual word. So it's a bit of a continuum with kind of analytical language processors at one end, and an analytical language processor is kind of more your typical profile of language development. So they start to say one word, and then they add two words together and three words together. And at the other end of that continuum are our Gestalt language processors, who are using more of those scripts. So some kids you find sort of fall a bit dual, some are more towards one end than the other. And when we think about communication boards for Gestalt language processors, it's really going to depend on where their language development is at. In the earlier stages, when they're still scripting, what we want to be doing is thinking about chunks of language that we can put out there and see if it sticks. So using lots of lovely intonation and appealing to their kind of musicality and their intonation baby brain. So you might have a vocabulary board, but have phrases and chunks of language under those pictures for a range of different reasons. So I've been working with the school, and they've developed a great, it's kind of like a dual processor book almost. There's a core vocabulary page on the front, and then we've got some chunky pages in the back. And so in that one, we've kind of had things like language for transition. And so it's been, let's go, it's time to tidy up. And you can then have a symbol with that whole phrase underneath. So you're starting to introduce chunks. So you can still absolutely use communication boards for our Gestalt language processors. It's just got to be at the right stage of their development, because what we know for them is as they continue in their development, they might then get to the stage where you're doing more of that structured sentence building with single words, but to start with thinking about chunks.
Yeah, and it's really important, isn't it, that you do add those to communication boards and amend them and update them as they change as well. There's no point keeping a board standard, is it? If a new Gestalt comes in, then it is really important that it is added on, and that people are modelling that and using it. When I had a little boy, and he was always saying to infinity and beyond. And that was one of his Gestalts, and people just assumed it was because he loved Buzz Lightyear, and we were trying to get that in, but then he didn't really seem all that interested in Buzz Lightyear. And what we worked out, he was actually repeating that Gestalt. It wasn't just him echoing it, it was linked to when he was anxious. So he'd obviously heard that at some point when there was some anxiety going on, and then when he became anxious, he was then linking that across. And it's again, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but it's working out when they say these, when they're getting these Gestalts, and linking it also to different situations, isn't it? It's not just them repeating it because they want that thing. It's about linking it to something that's happened and working out how we can work with them, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is about doing that detective work, like the number of Peppa Pig episodes I've watched because I've worked with children who are saying a particular phrase from a particular episode, and then you watch it back and you realise that in that situation something's happened where, for example, Daddy Pig got something wrong, and it's that emotion and that feeling. And so they're using it to basically communicate a feeling or communicating something. We have to really do the detective work, and then we can start to put Gestalts and their kind of chunks that they do use onto communication boards, and next to them what we think might be language that they're trying to say. So if, for example, you might have to infinity and beyond, and then next to it, I'm so anxious, or I'm anxious. So
absolutely. Kind of link the two. Yeah, that's great. And I think some people might be thinking, well, there isn't a symbol, for example, for to infinity and beyond of Buzz Lightyear and stuff. So within the software, as well as using the symbols, you can also put your own photographs and things in there as well, for people who are wondering how you might do that. And again, we've got some videos which we can reshare in our stories after this to show the different things that you can do. Rachie Bear 81 has commented, and she's just said it would be really helpful to see a communication board being used in action. videos for some of the resources would be amazing. So we did do a couple last week, Rachel. So again, if you can't find those, drop us a message and we can send them across. So there's myself modelling how you might use an aided language or communication board. There's then an example of me doing it for bubbles and bubble time. Which will come back to the post that you did yesterday actually really nicely. And then we've also got a video as well of a pupil from Evergreen School in Warwick, which is our local school, using a communication board in their cafe alongside their speech and language therapist, and that's really lovely. I just want to go back to the video that I've just spoken about where I'm not sure if you've seen it, Ruth, where myself and my colleague were modelling the use of the bubbles, and that links really nicely to the post that you did yesterday about not withholding things from anyone that you're using a communication board with. And for people who haven't seen that video, it's a video of my colleague Sue and we're modelling that we're saying bubbles on. And even though I'm not getting that interaction and back and forwards or a response essentially from the person that I'm working with, I'm not stopping the bubbles, I'm not keeping it from them. So do you want to explain a little bit about the post that you did yesterday and how that links to making sure that you're using communication boards really effectively with people that you're working with?
Yeah, I think you've had it in one of your videos over the last sort of communication board photo things you've been doing about modeling without expectation. And I think that's something really important, because I think historically there's been a lot of practice around communication and thinking pretty much solely about how to get individuals to ask for what they want. And that's the sole focus of communication development. And in those times, it's then been about kind of an expectation from the adult that the individual has to do something in order to get something. So whether that is exchange a picture, whether that is kind of point to a symbol, whether that is sign please or say thank you. And, you know, there's all of these things that we often see. And it's like once they've done it, then they get the thing. And until they've done the thing we're expecting, they don't get it. And, you know, we live by Maya Angelou's quote around like, when we know better, we do better, right? Absolutely. And I think what we understand and what we can see now is that really that is such a small part of communication. And while it is important that we kind of think about enabling individuals to ask for the things they want, it's about thinking about so much more for communication. And when we withhold something and kind of expect an individual to do something in order to get that thing that they want, what we're actually kind of teaching is quite a behavioral based response. And I've worked with so many children who would just look at an adult and sign please over and over again, because they've been taught that you say please to get the thing you want. But
Absolutely.
they don't have communication skills to actually then say what it is that they want. Likewise, you know, children who would walk around with a blank piece of card giving it to someone because they've kind of learned, I've got to do this thing, but they haven't really got the language that symbol and that kind of a broader range of vocabulary gives. So if we're not withholding, what we can do is foster a sense of safety, security for children. And that is going to be a really good foundation for developing communication skills. We can tune in, we can see what it is that they are seeking. You know, usually they will point, they will reach, and we can then just model that language. I think, like, you know, when we think about typically developing children, often as, you know, adults, we might like hold something and go, yeah, you need to say please. But these kids who have got communication skills that we're then kind of teaching that sort of bolt-on social thing around. Whereas I think when we're thinking about it being for children who have communication differences and challenges in getting their needs met, we need to really meet them where they're at and think about how we can foster that relationship, that safety, security, and basically have fun with communication. Because if it's stuff you want, there's so much to talk about. There's so much to say about like how much fun it is, whether we like it, let's do it again, let's have some more. And we can put all of these things onto our communication boards and give them so much language, rather than basically teaching them that one fringe word. If, for example, in your example, they say bubbles and then you blow the bubbles and you're waiting until they've said it, all they're learning is bubbles, and you're kind of teaching this whole prompt situation. And again, in my experience, I've worked with so many individuals who've become really dependent on the prompt and kind of almost waiting, and communication just doesn't flow spontaneously, and that doesn't help them advocate for their needs. It doesn't help them kind of communicate a broad range of things. So I think it's kind of challenging. What are you withholding it for? How is that teaching communication? And how could you perhaps model in a more natural, humanistic way, rather than kind of this behavior response thing, which is a bit more of a behavioral way? And what we know is really that communication, while we see everyone saying communication is behavior, the way we're teaching it, we want it to be a more natural approach to language than it is kind of a behavioral approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I like very early on, you know, I was very guilty of that when I first started working with some pupils, and I was, you know, we were doing snack and we were getting whatever and they were saying please to me. So I was, you know, I was never withholding anything. I was giving them, and it was my speech and language therapist who pointed out, and they said they haven't communicated that they want the apple or whatever it is you were giving them. She said, I was like, but they said please, and she said they said please, but then you haven't modelled what they've taken. You haven't said, is it delicious? Should we put it in the bin? So yeah, it is about adding those extra functional words, those extra functional words, isn't it? So you've got that excitement. And I think one of the most important things for me when I was working with my pupils is I think you need to give people the opportunity to say no.
Yeah.
It's not always about wanting things, isn't it? And one of my favorite interactions was where I had a full-on non-speaking argument with one of my teenagers that I worked with, because he did not want to do maths. He didn't want to, you know, and he was saying to me no, and I was saying it's time for maths, and he was like, no, I want the laptop like first. And I was like, no, it is learning time first. And you know, it was lovely. And then he was laughing at me because he was joking, and it was just really nice. But it's giving that opportunity and getting the language right for those pupils and those people that you work with, and always setting those high expectations. I think, isn't it? Not just expecting because they can't verbalize something, it's giving them other ways to communicate, isn't it?
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
so. And I think so much of it is about presuming potential as well, because I think sometimes I think, you know, children should just be given a choice of two things, and we're going to work with those two symbols, and those two symbols tend to be you know, like that noun vocabulary in a snack, or I kind of will see things that are just like a communication board, but it's just got like more and finish, or and while I can understand where the mentality comes from with that, I kind of say go big or go home when it comes to communication boards. And I think the more, you know, like maximize the amount of symbols that you can put on one of these, and give that individual some opportunity with modeling, and think that they're not going to learn it once. Like they need to have this modeling lots and lots of times. There's a lovely thing out there about teaching kind of alternative and supportive ways for communication, that's thinking about it comparatively to a typically developing baby who, if they had so many hours of language input, it takes them 12 to 18 months before they say one word. So if we're only modeling sort of 20 to 30 minutes a week, it could take an awful long time for us to see that one word. So presuming potential and maxing as many, you know, symbols as you can on those communication boards, those aided language boards, is going to be really important. And then not giving up too quickly and then dropping it down. So actually starting with plenty, model, and see what happens over a, you know, more prolonged period of time, before you then think, actually maybe let's take a few off. You know, would be my advice.
Absolutely. And I think that modelling is key. And I think I've worked with some families who, you know, understandably are anxious that if you introduce symbols and signs, that is then going to stop that verbal communication. I mean, and we know that, you know, the verbal communication may not come for some people that we're working with, but I think it's really important when you're using symbols, when you're using Makaton, you know, you're always dual coding, aren't you? You're verbalizing, you're pointing to the symbol as well, and it's just like you say, model. And I think I've worked with some pupils where I've done every single day. We've done the same activity. I know exactly what snack they're having because I know what they want. I know their needs. We've done the wow, etc. And then 6 months later, they've all of a sudden just gone to me like, and they've told me what they want. And it's like, oh, but that's like 6 months. But like you say, it's, you know, they've got to see that over and over again. And my speech and language therapist said exactly the same about them hearing the word daddy. And they're like, you would never give up speaking it to a newborn baby, so you mustn't give up. This one leads on quite nicely, actually, the question someone's put. How do we make a decision about how many symbols we add to a communication board? So you've kind of answered that a little bit, but do you want to go a little bit further into that? Is that all right with
Yeah,
you?
yeah. I think, as I say, I think it is about, I would say, putting on as
Mhm.
many to start with. There are a few things that I would consider, though, always.
Mhm.
So as much as that's kind of a blanket go, go as big as
Yeah.
possible. What I would be thinking about is, for some children, particularly those with sensory processing differences, too much visual information can be really
Mhm.
overstimulating. So have a look and see if you're putting quite a few symbols and they're swiping it out of the
Yeah.
way. If it's maybe they are, there's lots of visual information they're taking in a classroom, at that point, making the symbols, putting slightly fewer on the page might be
Mhm.
helpful. And that's worth kind of finding out a bit about their sensory processing, kind of what that looks like for them.
Mhm.
Equally, for individuals with a visual impairment, we want to be thinking about those kind of contrasts with colours, and how they're set up. And so kind of speaking to specialist teachers on those kind
Mhm.
of topics to be important, because again, if you've got a child with a visual impairment, too many symbols actually could be too much for
Yeah,
them. So
absolutely.
yeah, I think that's really, they're kind of my key things. Is I would always say, put plenty on,
Yeah.
but bear in mind kind of any visual impairments or any visual processing differences. Equally, if you've got kids who've just got, like me, well, I don't know, I think I'm a bit long and short all in between now, but thinking about, actually, is there something just from a general sight perspective that means they might be better with slightly bigger symbols,
Mhm.
and by nature you tend to then end up with less on a
Yeah.
page. um, Obviously, within widget, I use both widget online and in print, and so you can kind of change and play about with the
Mhm.
grid you're using there, so you can kind of try different sizes out as well.
Yeah.
Some individuals, I'd have plenty of symbols, but I'd make the boards A3, so they're that little
Yes.
bit bigger, so you can kind of get
Yeah.
around sometimes and still keep plenty of vocab there.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And I think that completely right. And like you're saying, within widget online and in print, I've got some examples here. So this is one like that for me. I would say is probably the minimum I would have to begin with. They're quite big symbols, so for your pupils who are starting quite early on, that I would say that's minimal like language that I would want on a communication board. And then you've got your ones where you've got a lot more on there as well. And I don't know, and again, just correct me if I'm wrong on this, but personally, what I do to keep it easier is I do tend to try and keep like my pronouns and things the same on each board, so then you've got that motor memory when they're moving between.
Yeah,
And then I do stick to like your fringe vocabulary per page. So if we're going to the beach, I'll have my beach
yeah,
on one aided language board. If we're going into town, I'd have my town language on another aided language board. And one thing that came up in some of the questions actually last week was saying about having separate boards, and they're like, what should we do with them? Should we just get one out at a time? Now, I personally always had them because that's like their voice, and they should be able to access it even if we're not in town. They should be able to open that up and start talking about town if that's
yeah,
something that they wanted to do. And I know when I was working in school, parents would say to me, can you make me one for home and then a separate folder for school? And I was really reluctant to do that because I said, no, it's their voice that should be going with them.
yeah,
And they were like, oh, but it gets a bit tatty. And I'm like, that's fine. If it's tatty, we know then that it's being used. And we just need to be remembering between both settings, it transfers between the two. If it gets lost, that's okay. We will make another one, but we won't make two separate ones because they haven't got two separate voices. They need their voice with them at all times.
yeah.
And that did come up last week. Something else that came up, and one of the questions we've got, Ruth, was, can communication boards be used in conjunction with AAC devices, or should they be two completely standalone tools?
For me, I say the more in your communication toolbox, the better. So if
Okay.
you have got a individual who is a device-based AAC user, because ultimately communication boards RAAC.
Yeah.
You know, AAC stands for Alternative and Augmentative Communication. So it's just paper based
Yeah.
as opposed to device based. So
Low tech, isn't it?
yeah,
Low tech
it's low
AAC. Yeah.
tech, you know, and so I think they can definitely be used in conjunction. What I'd be thinking about is where that device user is on their kind of learning journey with AAC.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we find that once they get really into their AAC journey, they just use that. And I always say, but keep the paper base, because tech fails
Mm-hmm.
you, it breaks down, the cloud
Yeah.
thing that you were meant to download your backup from doesn't work, whatever. So
It dies, yeah.
go in.
Mm.
And realistically, you know, for teachers, I would be advocating for them programming the device with lesson-based vocabulary. But what,
Mm.
like, the reality of being able to do that and then create aided language boards and kind of do all of that for teachers in busy settings can be really tricky. And so
Absolutely.
having a paper-based board alongside the device on a child's desk when they're in a lesson is going to be brilliant, because they're going to have access to the vocabulary that's lesson specific, which is very much quite often like more free
Yes.
vocabulary, and then they're going to have their kind of robust language with them that does all of those kind of beautiful things about sharing joy and commenting and
Yeah.
you know, protecting, and all of that kind of stuff can be there.
Absolutely.
So I think they definitely should work together. As I say, like for me, communication is about a toolbox, you know, so it's about having all of those different things there to try and enhance and maximize an individual's communication capacity.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I'm just looking through some of the questions to say. So someone has said, are these live videos saved to watch at a later date? Yes, they are saved. So it will be on both of our stories at the end of this, or widgets, and yours, Ruth. So it'll be on there. Just checking the questions. Um, oh, we've got, so someone has said, should I use pictures of real objects or stick with symbols? Which is a really good question.
Yeah, it is. So like historically, like I used to do training on this like ladder where it's like, right, first you start with objects, then you move into like true object based icons. They were called toby, like 3D things, and anyway, all the way up to symbols. I would say it depends on an individual, but for the most part, nearly all children that I've worked with understand the yellow M means McDonald's and the
Yes,
Netflix symbol and the
don't we
Disney
all?
symbol. So I think they are very teachable. And again, presume potential. So, you know, if it is a child, so I've created like using I can't remember if it was widget online or imprint, but created communication boards where we've done the core vocabulary has all been symbols, but the specific toy that the child was playing with, we've put those in using pictures of the object. Or for example, a TV choosing board that's got the core vocabulary and then it's got the, you know, kind of the image for the program. So if there are things that are really important to that individual and they are quite likely to understand it in the image rather than a symbol, and I think the other thing is that for a lot of the symbols, like the widget symbols, are really clear for quite a lot of that noun kind of vocabulary.
Absolutely.
You know, an apple looks like an apple,
An apple
and
does look
using the
like
software, you can change the colour. So if you are
yeah.
a pink lady fan, you could probably make a pink lady apple if you wanted to keep it red or green. So I think for the most part, symbols are really quite comprehensive. It's more those really bespoke individual, you know, if they've got a toy that they love playing with that's a monkey, you might be better using the picture of that object.
That monkey, yeah. And I think one I always use pictures for, to be honest with you, I always use it for people.
Yeah.
Where there are people on the communication board, I always pop the actual photographs in there. And children love that, don't they? Because they like to talk about the people that they love and their friends that they're with. So yeah, the specific ones are good for things like that. But as you say, the symbols are really easy to understand because that's how they're drawn. You know, we're working to we want them to be like that way. And what I used to do, where I had pupils where they were doing that transition where they were struggling from object to picture and then symbol, I would have the croissant. This is one that I did. So I had the symbol of a croissant, but I also had then a picture of a croissant as well, but I used them alongside each other, so they were next to each other, so they could see them both as well. So you've got that transition in there.
Yeah, I've made it
Um,
before with like a photo and then put the little widget symbol in the corner, you know,
yeah,
like so it's there.
and there's a template for that actually within Widget Online. And
Amazing.
you were saying as well about changing the colours of the symbols. I do quite a lot of training, and even though people have been using the software quite a lot and quite extensively, they say, I didn't know that I could change the colour of the symbols. So
Yeah.
just to let everyone know, every single symbol in the set, we've over 20,000, can be changed to meet the needs of the person that you're working with. So you can change the skin tone, so it matches the skin tone of the people that you're working with. But then, like you're saying, the symbols, so if a child has a pair of ear defenders, if their ear defenders are purple, there's a little artist palette at the top. And again, if people are ever struggling with this, just drop us a message, we can show you how. Little artist palette at the top, you click on it, and then that will allow you to change the colour of that symbol. And likewise, if you go along on the right hand side in our software, you've got your image library. That is where you go to upload your own photographs as well. So, you know, there's lots of different things that you can do in the software to make it really personal. Oh, let's see what other questions we've got. I don't think I've got any more on the board. I'm just going to slide down. Done there. There we go. Don't think. It's really hard to scroll when it's little. Just checking. I think we've got everything on here. I don't want to miss anyone's questions. Can you see the questions as well, Ruth? Or is it
Yeah,
just me?
I think I've been
Yeah, they
answering.
just, because there's lots of people joining in and out.
Yeah.
I think I've covered most of them off here. If anyone, if I have missed any, please just pop it on again, and hopefully between Ruth and I, we will see it if we've missed any. We've done that one. Yeah. So I think I've covered the questions off there. So this is another couple different questions. So one is linked to multilingual settings. So someone's saying, how can communication boards be used in multilingual settings, and how can I adapt them for this?
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. I think it's really powerful, and actually like there are individuals I've worked with where their engagement with symbol communication has just skyrocketed when we have been able to adapt it to incorporate their language from home, as well as kind of, you know, the languages that are spoken at
Yeah.
home, as well as English within the school setting. So yes, definitely check in with parents and families. You know, they know so much in terms of how their kids are communicating if it's in a different language to the language spoken in the setting, and then yeah, make it as accessible as you can, really, because symbols are obviously, you know, worldwide. Like an apple looks the same whatever language, but actually in terms of the language modeling and, you know, potentially enabling language to be modeled at home as well as in setting, kind of adding in different languages is fabulous.
It is. And I think what I found, even if it's a symbol just alongside the English text, it could be, you know, if we're working with children who are bilingual or multilingual and we're saying the word ball, if they do not know what that word is, as soon as you put a picture of a ball next to that, they're like, oh, I know what that is in my language, and they can access it. And I always use that example of the toilet. If you got off the aeroplane and you need the toilet and you're in a different country and it's in a language you can't speak, if it was just the text, you wouldn't know where you're going. You pop that symbol, that you look for that symbol of a toilet, don't you? And then you know where you're going, and it's exactly the same. And within Widget Online, you can translate as well, and we've got dual language templates if that's something that people are interested in. So we can actually translate to over 80 different languages, and again, something I feel like I'm going to have lots of follow-up little videos after this to do, but one of the key features that you can do within Widget Online in any communication or aided language board that you make, you can click when you're on your main documents page, and if you click on it in view mode, it then brings it up with its own unique web link. And at that point, if it's on a device, it becomes like a very basic AAC device. And if you click on it, you get that output. So it speaks the English at you, but it also will speak some of the languages back as well. So you can actually hear the dual language back as well. So then you can communicate and interact with that person. Because, you know, we can't always speak that language, but it's just another tool to be able to work with people there as well. This one is a good one that you might be able to work with. How do I address my child's frustration if they can't find the word they need?
Ooh,
It is a hard one.
that is super tricky. I think, you know what, my first go-to, a really brilliant friend of mine, she's a counsellor, and she always said, if in doubt, validate. And I hold on to that, like, so like, it's frustrating, like
Yeah.
actually first of all validating, because then you can offer some language for that
Yeah.
frustration that they're
Like,
experiencing.
it's so annoying. It's not there. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so I would kind of say like, oh, it's frustrating, and you maybe have the symbol for frustrated if this happens a lot, because actually that in
Yeah.
itself is some language that you can teach. I would be thinking about managing the frustration and thinking about tools to manage the frustration, depending on how frustrated it is, you know. And then I would be thinking about modeling the language for those words that they can't find, and that might be through spoken language, it might be spoken language and sign if you don't have, you know, the ability to quickly whip up a new symbol for those particular communication boards. And then I think sometimes I will say to children, if they're getting frustrated, I'll say, can you show me, you know, if I'm trying to work out what it is, and do that detective piece to work out the word, because you might not always know. Sometimes you can be in a situation, you can really like tune in, and you can think, oh, that's what they're after, and then you can kind of say, I think you want, or you're thinking
Yeah.
about this particular thing.
Absolutely.
Whereas I think, you know, like, and that's the thing with the with paper-based tech, you know, paper-based communication tools, is we don't necessarily have that flexibility. What I tend to do quite a lot is leave a blank space or two and have pen and paper, and while my symbols are nowhere near the quality of which is printed ones,
Yeah.
I can roughly draw
Yeah.
sometimes.
Absolutely.
And
I always
also
have
workboard.
something else as well. Like something else, I always have that on. So then at least I can say, is it
Yeah,
something else? And then even if that's not on there, we can't work it out. It's like, oh, it is something else. And then we can continue then to work and regulate that person and give them what they need to get them calm. And then hopefully we can work out what it is later.
yeah,
But yeah, it is really difficult. And you can understand, because I get frustrated and anxious if I'm somewhere and I can't get my point across. So
yeah.
yeah. Someone has said, hello both. Would it be okay if I asked a question about play for a GLP? Yeah, absolutely. Please do. We'll try and keep an eye on it coming in. So hopefully that comes in there. And just let me check these. So we've got, what should I do if my child keeps pointing to random symbols and not what they mean?
That's a really interesting one. I think one of the things to think about is, if you know what they mean, would be modeling back
Yeah.
and making sure the vocabulary is on there. What I also say to a lot of people is, you know, you hear it a lot with device-based communication, but it can happen with paper-based communication tools. Is that, imagine, you know, for some of these children, they might be 3, 4, 5, 6. I work with 12, 13-year-olds where we just start to introduce communication tools like this. If you'd gone that whole amount of time without any words, you probably go pretty mad for all the words that you've got, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, you know, all of these
Yeah.
things. And you do see that quite a lot. And I think, you know, I kind of have teachers going, oh, how do we manage this, or what do we, it's distracting. I think as a parent, you kind of, you know, on the most part, if you're kind of at home and you've got that maybe that quieter environment, it's maybe like a bit more, they can lead what's going on, whereas in education there's an expectation about the activities that are happening. I'd just be tuning in and kind of giving them the feedback as they're pointing to all these random things, and kind of being like, oh, it's, you know, it's this, it's that. If they're specifically wanting something, you might say, I think it's, and pointing to the picture of what they want.
Yeah. And then giving them,
yeah. And if you've got a board that's got core on, you actually, I like all these words, like I like these pictures, so you can start to model some of the other symbols that are on there. But I think it's really important that we honour all communication. So if it feels and seems confused in terms of what they mean, model back. And then I think if it is just that exploratory communication stuff, just join them in the joy of the fact they've got some words, and interactions, and if it's things that you've got around, grab one and be like, yeah, it's this and
That's
it's that, and I can
it.
see it, see this and like this. And
Yeah. And it is difficult, isn't it? I had a little boy who he really loved the beach, and he would be constantly saying to me he wanted to go to the beach, be pointing to the beach symbol. And some people would say, well, we need to stop him pointing to that because he can't go to the beach. He's at school where he's at school. We're in the middle of Nottingham city centre. There's no way we are getting to a beach today. But we, like you say, we try to embrace it. And we were like saying, the beach, I know it's so sad that we cannot go swimming today, but maybe at the weekend I will tell mummy, and then we'd watch videos of the beach and things like that and try and bring it in that way, because he obviously loved the beach. That's what he wanted. So it's like you say, it's really validating, isn't it? And just trying to work out how to build the communication in other ways.
yeah.
I hope that helps, Rox. But any other questions, please drop them to one of us after if you want to speak a bit more. We've got someone. Can you create interactive tasks in Widget Online? At the moment, Widget Online is more about creating resources that you can then print off and use. We are in the process. There is an app being developed. We're not sure when it's going to be released just yet, but there's going to be an app called Symbler that is going to have interactive activities on. There'll be lots of pre-made activities in there, and people who've got the app as well will also be able to create their own interactive activities. But again, there'll be more information coming out about that in the future, and I can check with my marketing team and things when I can share a bit more information about that. So drop us a message if you want to know about that. And I just want to see if I can find the one about the play.
Yeah, I've got it here.
Have you got it? Do you want to read it out?
Yeah, child who likes to stack toys, but those items are not always easily stackable,
Okay.
and becomes frustrated if calm, emotional co-regulation and strategies in place. Any other thoughts for supporting? I work with so many children who have this fixation around, like, we want to do this particular thing and the toy just won't do it. It's really common. I think absolutely in terms of that co-regulation. I would also be thinking about, I think you said that there are Gestalt language processes. So what are their Gestalts for frustration? How you can kind of offer language for that situation. It might also be looking at their particular play schema. So if they're into stacking certain things, can you offer things that are easier to stack, and then kind of enjoy the stacking process rather than kind of this tricky thing. I would say thinking about potentially the language that you could model, and again, this could be, if it's always this same activity, you could create a really lovely communication board around it, where if they're stacking random objects, you could put them and say, and have, it's tricky, it fell down, oh no, let's try again, or let's do something different. And you could put those lovely chunks onto your communication board with some of the things that they are enjoying stacking. It's definitely a tricky one, and it's not one that I kind of would say quick fix. I think absolutely the co-regulation strategies are really important. But then, yes, identifying if it's a particular schema, are there other activities that they could do that might be less frustrating for them because it doesn't stack.
Perfect. I've got another one. So how can I adapt these boards to a classroom? So so many ways. So like we've spoken out anyway, so if it's an individual who's using them solely for their communication, then they will have their individual boards that have got all of their core and their fringe vocabulary linked to them. But for a classroom, you can make communication boards for every single thing that you're doing in there. There's an absolutely amazing account on here. It's Little Chicks Nursery, or Little Chicks Day Nursery, and they've got these wonderful boards for each of their areas within their early years setting. So they've got the construction area, they've got the vehicles that are on there, they've got the language like your push, your pull, your roll, then they've got them for the dinosaurs, for the trains, for the toys outside, and it's got all of your core language on there. So find accounts that like that one. If you look on there, you can see some really lovely examples of it being used. I've just done it for it's a Key Stage 2 science lesson. I'm going to be modelling one of those in a couple of weeks, and I've put my core language for STEM on there, so my observe, my evaluate, lots of these words, especially in subjects like maths and science, where you're introducing new vocabulary to pupils all of the time, quite abstract vocabulary, whether you are autistic or whether you have an additional need. This new vocabulary is really difficult for any pupil. If you don't know what it is and someone's saying a word to you, by popping a symbol alongside that, it allows you to add that extra layer of meaning, doesn't it? And when then you see that symbol again, because symbols, well, visuals are actually processed 90,000 times quicker to the brain than text is. So then you've got that visual there, so you can use them for all your topics. I would be making topic boards. If I've got a new topic, I'd have my visuals alongside that. I'd have it when I'm introducing new vocabulary, I'd have it in there. I had them for my song sheets when we were in assembly for pupils that needed them to sing along. So there's so many ways that you can adapt them for in a classroom. If you think that if you've got a subject and you think I want to add symbols, you can definitely do it. Just have a go, but if you're not sure, drop us a message and I'll help. But yeah, there's lots of ways that you can do it, but I would definitely start with topic boards. That's the easiest way to do it. And as well, having symbols around your classroom for wayfinding and things, so getting your draw labels on there. Lots of people, if you're frustrated with your class not being able to tidy up, if you pop a little symbol next to it, they can be independent in getting the resources they need, but then also as well in popping them away if they can't see that. Let's see, got any more? Can you see any more questions?
Just the bit about GLP, about maybe modelling alongside with stacking of the toys. Yes, I think that sounds like a great idea.
Okay.
The other thing I'm thinking about is a teacher I work with. She does her widget online boards for her lessons, for like her bucket time and things, and she'll have them out on the tables for the TAs supporting the students, but then she opens up widget online on her whiteboard. So she's got a big behind her and she's using her big widget board, and I think that works really nicely in a classroom, because as a teacher you can be modeling to the whole class, and then they've all got their kind of individual topic boards and boards in there as well, and it flows really nicely in terms of that inputting symbols, both from the front, because that can be a bit tricky as a teacher if you're kind of, oh god, everyone's got individual things. You can get them up in front of you if you've got a whiteboard, and that works really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you pop that into that view mode, like I said earlier, it will bring it up on the board for you, but you can then get the auditory output as well. So when you click on them, if you need children to like tap on them, they can hear it as well if you've got your speakers and things on your board. But yeah, I always did that. I had them on my board as well as with my pupils at the front. What can be done if a child keeps pulling his trousers down in the school playground? So that's not really at the moment, that's not really linked to massively to the communication boards topic at the moment. So obviously I'd speak to your Senko about that, and I'd thinking about his sensory needs with that, isn't it? I would say, Ruth, and thinking about why is he pulling his trousers down. It could be, you know, the fabric on his trousers, it could be that he wants the cold on his body. There's lots of different reasons that he could be doing that. So I'd be speaking to an occupational therapist probably about that. If you wanted to have a communication board linked to that, I'd be having words on there like trousers on, trousers up, like is it cold, are they itchy, and putting words on there just to try and establish what it is that's making him pull them down, because there's obviously a reason that he's doing that. So it's supporting him to think about why it is best to have our trousers on, you know, for his dignity and things, but it's making sure that it's communicating that with him in a way that they understand, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Get curious.
Yeah.
It's first protocol with those things, and then you can think about, you know, there's obviously that immediate safeguarding and making sure, you know, dignity is maintained, but actually, wondering what's driving that, you know, something is overwhelm and a bit of an outlet.
And it's saying that it's the transition for playtime or going for lunch, and again, this isn't really it's kind of not linked to the communication boards, but what's coming to my head, I think, at the moment is that seems like he's doing it at playtimes, he's doing it at the transition when he's leaving the classroom. So it could be that he's thinking, if I take my trousers off, I'm not going to have to go outside. It might be something that he's not liking. and he knows that that's a behavior that's going to make him stay
Yeah.
inside. It might not be that, but kind of initially that's what I'm thinking. It's working out why he's doing
And
that
I think
thing.
that's the nice thing about communication boards, though, is that you can almost test an hypothesis. So if going back to what my counsellor friend says about if in doubt, validate. Well, actually, if you put a few of those options of transitions are tricky, I don't want to go, some of those symbols onto a communication board, you could then test that theory when that's
Mm,
happening and kind of give him some language. My supervisor, Kate Booth, she always says language for experiences. And I think it might be actually just through giving him that language for the experience he's having could test the
mm,
hypothesis that maybe it's this. So you can still use communication boards in that kind of working out and that curious state. So it's
absolutely.
easy sometimes for adults to have conversations about it. And
Yeah.
everyone's got their individual communication capacity, but I think presume potential that he might be able to communicate something, or at least acknowledge if you've got it right when you're modeling what you think it could be on that communication board. Sometimes you see kids kind of look at you and they're like, oh yeah, you do get this, that this
Yeah.
transition's a bit tricky, and then you can make a bit of a plan, so
Yeah. It is a difficult one though, isn't it? But it's one of those as well, without knowing that child and
yeah.
being with that child and having that interaction, it's such a unique situation. So yeah, it's just working with people who know him really,
Yeah.
really well to support him as much as possible. But communication boards definitely could help by putting some of that language on there. Right, I think that we are just about done with the questions. I'm just going to check that there's no more on there that I've missed. And then if there isn't, then we will wrap it up. I can't see any more on there that I've missed. Yeah, so I think that's all of the questions covered that I can see, unless anyone's got any more that they just want to pop in at the moment. Have you got anything else that you want to share or say, Ruth, to round us off?
I don't think so. I think for me, communication is about it being meaningful and about connection. And communication boards can be a beautiful way of doing that if we tap in and tune into a child's interests and what gets them excited, and then give them some language opportunities to kind of do more than just request for those kind of meaningful interactions. So yeah, but I also love hearing about all the communication board successes. So I look forward to kind of hearing and sharing
Yeah,
how people use tools.
that would be amazing. If people do have any great successes with their communication boards, whether it's making them or using them, then please share those to your stories and tag Widget and tag Ruth in those, because it'd be great to see all of the things that people are doing with those. And also, again, I'm really happy for people to send questions via the Widget account for myself, or you can follow my personal account, which you'll see via Widget as well. It's ready_steady communicate. But I'm really happy to help in any way. And I know, Ruth, you will be happy to help as well, won't you?
The best.
Yeah, we try. We do try. We just want, communication to flourish for every single person, don't we? So we're trying our best. So yeah. Right. Well, we will say good night, because that hour has absolutely flown by. It has. I can't believe it's been a full hour. And we could probably talk for another 2, to be honest with you, couldn't we? We could keep going and going, but we best stop and go and check that everyone's in bed safely and things. But thank you so much for coming on this evening and chatting through all those questions with me, and we will share this to both of our stories and grids after this, so everyone can watch it back if they need to. But thank you very much, everyone, and we'll say good night, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye Ruth, thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.